Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to ENL 51. This week, we're going to be talking about persona, character, and characterization. Um, there's a set of technical or stylistic elements that rap shares with other styles and forms of literature, just like the other stuff we've been studying so far: storytelling, battling, and boasting. Hip hop puts its own spin on these stylistic elements or devices through its values and priorities, and each individual rapper uses these techniques in their own ways. So first, I just want to start off with some definitions of these terms. These terms are drawn from the study of other forms of literature. We're applying them to hip hop. So persona. Most often when we use the term persona in literature, we're talking about a personality that the author or the speaker of the poem, the voice speaking the poem, we're talking about a personality that they take on in a given poem. Sometimes that means they are speaking in the voice of a real historical figure or famous person. Sometimes it means they're speaking in the voice of an established fictional character that you would recognize, Rocky and Bullwinkle or SpongeBob or something like that. Sometimes they create their own fictional character that they're speaking in the voice of. And sometimes a persona poem or a poem utilizing persona doesn't have like a specific character in mind, but it's sort of seeking to amplify some specific personality trait or character trait or something like that in the author's life or the speaker's life. So, you might say that like your persona is the face you show to the world and not like your true self. And we kind of can think about it in similar terms in rap songs, that the persona that rappers take on is not exactly themselves the most authentically. They're like amplifying some aspects of their personality in order to be entertaining or grab your attention or stoke the imagination or whatever the case may be. So in hip hop, all of these different kinds of persona, the fictional characters, famous people, historical figures, and amplifying a certain aspect of personality, all of these different kinds of persona writing have important histories and touchstones in hip hop. So you've got rappers like Del the Funky Homo Sapien, who's on this week's list, who have written obviously fictional, fantastical stories, in his case, like a futuristic sci-fi story, and they invent characters for themselves. So Del is playing the character of Deltron. Deltron 3030 is the name of the album. You've also got rappers like MF Doom, who's I think he's on the B-sides this week, whose names and images and styles and how they present themselves speak from a specific persona across their work. And then there's also rappers who aren't necessarily playing fictional characters exactly, but they're still amplifying or modifying their personality in some way to present a specific persona, a kind of larger than life aspect of themselves. So we see that maybe in Tyler the Creator and Lil Kim on this week's list as some examples. At a certain point, the different terms we're using this week, persona, character, and characterization, kind of blend into each other. Usually in traditional literature, we think of persona more often in connection with poetry, and character and characterization more often in connection with fiction, stories. But those boundaries kind of break down sometimes, and there's overlaps and stuff like that. So I wouldn't take that too seriously. But I think there's some places where they're distinct that's worth kind of focusing on. So in fiction, and I'll say in rap music as well, a character is a fictional person in a story, and characterization is the set of strategies, devices, and techniques that the writer or rapper uses in order to make that character seem realistic or interesting or compelling or cohesive, or whatever they're trying to make. You can make a character seem unrealistic intentionally, and that would still be characterization. So just to kind of, we'll all use these terms somewhat differently, where we call it a character and where we call it a persona, and how those things match up and stuff. For me personally, I might call Stan in Eminem's song a character, because there's clearly a story happening and he's a fictional character that Eminem is talking about. But then I'd also note that Eminem is speaking in the persona or the voice of that character, Stan, as well. Like, he's not telling Stan's story in third person, he's telling it in first person from his voice. But then kind of more generally, I'd say that like Eminem, Slim Shady, and Marshall Mathers are all slightly different personas that Eminem takes on in different points throughout his work. We can't exactly define the distinctions between them, but they feel like slightly different personas that he takes on. So that's kind of why I call them persona rather than strict characters exactly. In DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince's song on the B-sides this week, I think I could be Mike Tyson. I'd say some of the characters in the song's story include Jazzy Jeff, even though he's a real person who helped make the song, Mike Tyson, Don King, the narrator's grandma, etc. I don't think I would personally call the Fresh Prince a character himself. I'd say that he's the narrator of the story, and that through this story, Will is trying to establish a certain kind of persona for himself. He's trying to tell us something about who he is by giving us this specific amplification of his personality. So if we were analyzing this song, if you were analyzing this song for a weekly forum post, you might ask, like, what is Will's persona in this song exactly? What kind of person or personality is he trying to show us through this story, and why? Why is that an interesting persona to take on? And what kinds of techniques does he use in this narrative in order to create this persona? So ultimately, our goal in this class, like I said, is not to get the terms right, to like learn the literary vocabulary and terminology. Our goal is just to pay close attention to what these MCs are doing and why, what kinds of styles and strategies they use, and what that allows them to accomplish in their literary art. I think using these terms and paying close attention to how rappers are doing what they're doing can help us sharpen our understanding of their projects a little bit. And finally, I think I said this in a previous video or something, but it's worth noting again and again that the stuff we're studying, I've broken up the syllabus into these weeks of themes and of this first half of the class of methods and techniques. But all of this stuff overlaps, as you will hopefully obviously notice that in this week's lesson, there are some storytelling songs, there are some boasting songs, and if you look back to previous week's songs, you'll see a lot of use of persona and characterization. And in future weeks, we'll continue building on our vocabulary for understanding different styles and themes and techniques of MCs. And we'll find all of this stuff at work in the future weeks as well. So these things aren't distinct. They overlap and they work together. Sometimes they work kind of against each other in some ways. So maybe it's time to take a look at the specific songs. I've already said some things about them, but as usual, I want to give you some background on the songs. So the required songs, first up, Del the Funky Homo Sapien, 3030 from his album, Deltron 3030. So as I said, this is a concept album that tells a futuristic sci-fi post-apocalyptic narrative of Deltron 3030. And Dan the Automator is the producer, DJ behind the album. He's a character in the song as well, Automator. Del was like, he is a very bizarre MC. I think he has his own style that I really like, even when he's not rapping about futuristic sci-fi stuff. His voice, the way he builds his rhythms and rhyme schemes, it's really interesting and really complex and just fun to listen to. You might know him most notably from he was on the Gorillaz' first big single back in the day. I don't know if people still listen to that. Yeah, Adele, he's great. Next up, Eminem, Stan. Probably don't have to say a lot about Eminem or that song, other than to note that I think this is a really classic narrative song in hip hop history, and the way that Eminem builds the story through characterization and persona is really interesting and worth studying in depth how he does what he does and why we enjoy listening to it. Next up, we've got Sage Francis, Guns Yo. Sage Francis is depending on who you ask, he's a somewhat notable MC in a certain era of indie hip hop or underground rap. He started out as a poet and he writes kind of poetic raps. There's this like famous rap battle. I could have put this one on last week's video instead of the Idea versus Shells, but he's battling this dude named Brother Ali, and I think Sage Francis ended up beating Brother Ali in the Scribble Jam battle. It's worth checking out. But I love Brother Ali comes at him with a line like he's like, man, I forget the rhyme, but he's like, the only battle you ever won is in a chat room. And chat rooms, if you don't know, sort of like Messenger, but has lots of people chatting at the same time. That's how folks like Sage Francis learned about rap and battling, is in chat rooms, and that's funny. I'm running off the rails here. I didn't really need to tell that story. Sage Francis, this song he puts on a persona that's not exactly a character, but it's obviously a kind of fictionalized personality for satirical purposes. And if you were writing about this, you'd ask, how is he accomplishing this satire? What's the point of the satire beyond the obvious? I think there's an obvious message. And then the song gets really weird in the second half, the second verse. Goes in really strange imagistic directions, and I don't really know what to make of it, so that could be interesting to look at too. Next up, we've got Tyler, the Creator, Yonkers. Man, this makes me feel old looking at this syllabus, because I remember like it was yesterday. I remember when Tyler and Frank Ocean and their whole crew were first coming up and getting a lot of shine. And it feels like yesterday to me, and now it's almost 10 years. So that's wild. Yeah, this is another one where I don't think he's playing a fictional character exactly, but he's amplifying some aspects of his persona in order to present a very specific image of himself. And we might ask, why is he doing that? What is it telling us about his values or about his relationship to hip hop culture or American culture, stuff like that. Finally, on the required songs, we got Kendrick Lamar, Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. I actually meant to say, the first half of the song, the Sing About Me half, the first three verses, are really what I'm asking you to focus on this week. To me, it's kind of two different songs that he chains together. And that's interesting to think about on its own. But for our purposes, thinking about persona and characterization, I think the first half, the first three verses, are really interesting to think about together. Yeah, so B-sides, got DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince again. I think this is an awesome, hilarious story song. Busta Rhymes, he's one of those rappers who has spanned multiple generations. He has his own thing that he does, and nobody has really been able to do it quite like him. And he plays up a specific image of himself as well, without playing like a fictional character. And so I think that might be worth looking at. The video for this song, Give Me Some More, is also worth checking out. Just his visual style is a big part of who he is in the history of hip hop. Outkast, Return of the G. The persona that Andre and Big Boy put on in this song might not even be fictional. It might be totally authentic. And yet it's still amplifying a certain aspect of their personalities for particular rhetorical purposes or functions. And also Andre's verse, I just think, is incredible. MF Doom, Doomsday. So my rap mentor and teacher, well, my poetry mentor, my rap teacher, Adrian Matika, when I told him I was teaching this class, his response was, if MF Doom isn't on the syllabus, I don't even want to hear about it. So Doom is his number one personal MC. And so I had to throw an MF Doom track on for Adrian's sake. He presents himself as a supervillain, and just like my questions in the weekly forum thread about why Dell, the funky Homo sapien, does what he does, what it helps him accomplish, I would ask the same thing about Doom. What is it that playing the role of a supervillain lets him accomplish in the world of hip hop and his relationship to hip hop culture? Finally, Lil Kim, Lighters Up. I think we've got more Lil Kim on the syllabus later in the quarter, but this is a classic track where she goes pretty hard. And the video for De La Soul, Me, Myself, and I think De La is another group that I'll talk more about later in the quarter. But they're part of what's called the Native Tongues collective or movement. Running out of vocabulary here. They kind of brought a new style to hip hop in their era. They wanted to go against the grain of what was becoming like gangster rap and stuff like that. And they prioritized like being themselves and kind of like a sort of hippie imagery and also a sort of Afrocentrism. And so the video kind of tells that story of how they see themselves not fitting in with hip hop culture and why they think that's a positive. The readings, got Adam Bradley's chapter on rhyme, and he kind of invents a couple terms for rhyme. It's worth knowing these terms. These are the kinds of things that might show up on an exam. So make sure that you can identify the different types of rhyme that he talks about. And again, I'm not as worried about you getting the exact right kind of rhyme as I am you understanding the basic concepts and being able to pay really close attention to what a rapper is doing in a given line or couplet or a set of lines or whatever. And finally, the page poetry has different takes on persona and characterization. Pluto Shits on the Universe is a classic persona poem where the voice, the speaker of the poem, is clearly a persona, a kind of not even a real person, but like a cosmic being, Pluto. And then the other poems take different approaches to persona as well. Cool. So I think that's about all I have for you this week. As always, if you have any questions about the material, you can email me. I'm going to be out of town on a camping trip for a little while this upcoming week, and so it might take me a little bit longer to email you back. If so, I apologize, but I will get back to you at some point. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Looking forward to reading your weekly forum posts and to continue digging into this material with you all. Thanks.